Okay, so we're going to do a pre-show here. Does anybody have a question? I'm going to go over some principles on how to draw anything after we officially start. But for now, does anyone have a question on how to draw anything specific? Is there anything you have trouble drawing you'd like to know a little more on how to draw it? Hands. Okay. So I'm going to first go over realistic hands, and then we're going to go over a little more cartoony hands. But it's it's useful to start off with the principles on how to do something realistically before you cartoonify it. And you don't have to get perfect how to draw realistically, but it's just good to understand the principles. Okay, so hold up your hand. Okay, you'll see that the knuckle, okay, so we're going to start off, we had a question on how to draw hands. And you'll see that your knuckles, the distance between each knuckle tends to be the same. It's hard to vary very much between, except for the knuckle for your thumb. And if you get the basic structure of that part of the hand where the parts don't move very much, those knuckles, starts off with a base, spreads out a little bit like a fan. The middle finger knuckle is the tallest. Then it varies a little bit, but then these two, the pointer finger and the ring finger, are a little bit lower, and the pinky finger is the shortest. It's a little bit offset on your wrist. You'll see that the pinky side of your wrist, your forearm, sticks out a little bit here, and then compared to the thumb, it indents a bit. And then the fingers go in the same structure. The middle finger, of course, is the longest, which is why it's so good for signaling people your displeasure. These two, about the same length. It varies which one's longer by person. And the pinky, of course, is shortest. Or the thumb is really the shortest, and the thumb knuckle can go all over the place, the whole opposable thumb thing. So it's the shortest, and then you can pretty much stick it wherever you need it to go. And once you can draw this basic structure of this wonky little house with the offset roof and the slanting sides of the walls, and if you can draw that at different angles, also note that when you look at your hand like this, the middle finger knuckle is also like a little roof. And again, there's not a lot of flexibility. There's some flexibility, but not a huge amount of flexibility in how you can move your knuckles of your fingers from each other. Once you can draw this shape at from different angles, roughly evenly spaced where the fingers come off it, and then once you have that structure, it's really easy to draw a realistic hand. So if I draw this like this, and I'm assuming you don't have some horrible injury that made you lose one of your hands. You always have your hands with you. You can always look at them, point them at you, base a drawing on it. So like if I go like this, you'll see that the pointing finger knuckle wants to point out a little bit more than the other fingers. The middle finger knuckle tucks in a little better, and then the next two fingers tend to go almost straight down. So suddenly have a very quick, easy fist. Or if you have this pointing out instead, you have a, so again, if you can draw this basic structure and then attach a thumb on the side wherever you want, you can draw a hand from almost any angle. But I have a friend, oh my God, I'm the worst at names. A Spider-Man artist friend of mine from the Chicago area. I'm just blanking on his name, but he kind of, for drawing realistic Spider-Man hands, he had a much simpler way of explaining it, which is this is me very much paraphrasing because he didn't say this. He pretty much draws a Mickey Mouse hand or a Mario Brothers hand where everything is based on circular forms, and you just draw kind of a donut, and then you do hot glue spray, teardrops coming off it that feel expressive. And he says that's how he draws a realistic hand. Then he just makes it more realistic after that. And his hands come out more dynamic than mine, so I can't say he's wrong. But if you understand the structure here and then apply it to this, those are two kind of basic ways to come at hands that work really simply. And if you can draw that, instead of drawing this fancy shape I did, which is based on skeletal anatomy, if you just draw that donut shape or whatever angle you need it at, and then have the fingers come off roughly evenly spaced. With Mickey Mouse with 3 fingers and a thumb, or with a real human with 4 fingers and a thumb, you can draw a hand. And I'm gonna, okay, so that was kind of the pre-show. Okay. Oh, there you go.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, if you ask a question and I answer it, you get the sheet of paper afterwards. Okay, so I'm just gonna say really quickly, we're living in an age where, of course, you can trace things and stuff like that, but it's not cheating to use photo reference. And it's especially not cheating if you shoot the photo reference yourself. So if there's anything in real life you need to draw, like say a bicycle, which is kind of a nightmare to draw, and you can get, and I can draw a bicycle just off the top of my head pretty well. The place where it gets complicated is doing a reasonably realistic bicycle and then somebody reasonably realistically riding the bicycle. You want photo reference, or at least I do. The other thing is I'm going to kind of give you a very basic kind of principle of art on how to draw realistically, which then can be applied to cartoony stuff when you just simplify it. Have you ever seen anybody in a movie or a TV show or cartoon who's an artist and they take a paintbrush and they go like this? Okay, does anybody know what they're doing? Go ahead.
That's when they're trying to measure their reference.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna aim at you and explain what I'm doing, and then after that, you know, you kind of do it to me and stuff like that if you have a pencil with you. So I am gonna. The important part is you keep your arm straight when you're doing this in real life. If you bend the elbow and change the distance, then it's going to change the unit of measurement because I'm going to create my own unit of measurement or inch. And the typical thing is you make it the length of a head. So I keep my arm at a consistent distance and about the same distance from my eye, figure out the height of your head. I can then use that as a measuring unit. If I go down one head down from your chin, it gets to about the bottom of your chest on you. And this is not consistent. It changes from person to person, image to image. I go another one down, it's just a little bit like around the bottom of your hips, but a little above that. And the tips of your lower hand, a little more than that down, almost to your ankle, and down from there, foot. So I verbally described what I'm seeing from him. But then that really quickly translates into what you can do with the drawing. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, the other thing they're doing, they're not just measuring, making up their own new definition of an inch, and then measuring distances. You also see them go like this. They're measuring angles. So I can literally go like that, measure that angle, bottom of the chest, about the bottom of the hips. Now, I'm going to mention that I'm seeing them a little bit from the top, so it's like seeing a box of cereal from this angle. Things will get smaller as they get further away from you. So his hips getting a little further down, bottom of the hip there, tips of the finger. If I can just abstract it out into just these simple shapes that aren't anatomical or anything like that yet. They're just outlines of the shapes I'm seeing. So what I'm seeing from him, from the angle I'm at, are these shapes. I said the ankle went down a little bit further than that. Actually, the foot's going to leak over a little bit over the side there. But once you have these shapes, it's relatively easy for almost anybody to then fill in the details and make it pretty much work. I'm not going to do it in super detail, but and because I chose you as my victim, you got to keep this one. Now you can, in real life, you want to keep your arm at the same length, keep your finger on the same place on the marker or paintbrush or whatever you're using when you're doing a measurement like that.
That's just so the frame of reference stays constant.
Yeah, because yeah, if you're going like this,
Yeah. Oh, suddenly that's.
yeah, everything's a different size. But yeah, then you have, and it's like the most useful thing when you actually trace a photograph isn't you can trace the details, is that you can trace the proportions and the placement of stuff. Like, so once I have this, doing it more realistically afterwards and filling in details is not so hard. Okay, but if you do that on an image like a still image, you can literally put your pencil on the screen and just measure how big things are. And you can kind of get a rough idea, and if you're doing a realistic image, you can kind of understand it, break it down an image that way. Before you do the more intuitive gestural, this is what the things look like, but you'll find that if you're not a practiced artist, things will tend to be wonky. And to figure out why it's wonky, you can break it down like this to simplify it. And allow you to draw things from different angles and different proportions, stuff like that you haven't been able to do before. And that's one of the tricks they use. But once you do get comfortable, I have a principle that if you draw something well 10 times with reference, after that you can pretty much just draw it reasonably well without reference after you get it done about 10 times. Once you get it right, it kind of sticks after a while. You're not always going to get it perfect, but it really helps just getting it right those 10 times. Okay, so next question on how to draw anything. Go ahead.
Folds in clothing.
Oh, what's that?
Folds in clothing.
Okay. So if you look at my pants down here, you'll see a bunch of creases coming off of the crotch of my pants. Then it bunches up here, then loose, and then jagged. So I'm going to show you a few principles on folds in clothing. Okay, so the t-shirt I'm wearing right now is pretty much like laying out like this. But if you're doing your laundry and you're looking at the t-shirt, it looks like this. Right? So you'll see that because I'm forcing this inwards, and there'll be little scrunch marks here. Then as it goes down, gravity pulls it from where it's hanging on my shoulders, stretches it out, and then bunches up as it kind of catches against my waist. So it goes from a kind of long sags to jagged, zigzaggy sags. Imagine that pose. On my crotch, kind of the same thing. It bunches up a little bit, but then instead of being scrunched only, it's being stretched. And the top surface of my, this is not a wrinkle, this just indicates the top surface of my thigh. It's being stretched from the crotch of the pants to the top surface of my thigh. And you'll see these kind of stretch marks like that. Then the squigglies, as it gets bunched up in my knee, stretch from the crotch to the front surface of my thigh there, bunches up a little bit around the knee because I bend it there and then unbend it. Going down, just like with the shirt, you get the long zigzag going to the squiggly zigzags at the bottom. So at the top where it's near where it's hanging, loose zigzag. Then as it bunches up, tight zigzags. And if you go all the way wrap around, you'll see that kind of forms. It tends to form at where these zigzags kind of bunch up. It forms kind of overlapping diamond shapes if you go around it. But a simpler way to think of it is just tight zigzags. And those are kind of some basic principles on how to draw clothing. Like over here, you'll see stretch marks on the bottom of my chest going to downwards and stuff like that. But those are the basic shapes you'll be working with when drawing wrinkles in clothing. Okay, so new person, new question on how to draw anything. Go ahead. Oh, shoes? Okay, I'm gonna show you the simplest trick I ever figured out on my own, never saw in a book, on how to draw feet and shoes. Okay. Does anyone here have a really sensitive sense of smell? No one has said yes, so I'm going to do something horrible and uncouth. Okay, so bare foot in a sock. Okay, so this is what the bottom of a shoe looks like. And if you want to draw that from any angle, so let me draw the basic shape. It tends to be something like this on most shoes. Now, are you decently good at drawing things from an angle? Okay, so if you imagine this shape at different angles, lying on the floor, like a cutout of a shoe or the insole of a shoe just laying on the floor. Now, here's a trick I came up with that makes a reasonably accurate, realistic foot, shoe, lower leg. Put an ankle on it. Figure out what angle you want the lower leg at. And then just you have an arch of the foot, which comes a little bit off the ankle, kind of the high point of it, or the archiest part of it here, then slopes down to the toes. Oh, also, everything here doesn't touch the ground on your foot. And you kind of feel that the outer edge of your foot, the toes and the heel all touch the ground, but that inner edge here that forms a little kind of like a little cave that doesn't touch the floor. But so you get that high arch, low arch to the toes. You suddenly got a foot and a shoe drawn at an angle. Let's take it from this one. Put the ankle above it. Put a lower leg calf on it. You got a shoe and a foot. Seen from behind, little heel, put the ankle above it. That's my really simple trick for very quickly drawing a reasonably realistic foot and shoe. High heels. You know that kind of classic shape from the side view of a high heel shoe? So it's taking that shape and just warping it a little bit. Ankle on it. Draw from a different angle. Flat. Slope down like a little sledding hill. Flat. Ankle. Same thing. Very simple trick. Now there's some pretty tricky geometry that goes on with the actual anatomy of the foot, which is pretty much an ape's hand that got deformed. There's a lot of, like, most animals that are good at kicking don't injure their feet by kicking things. You're not going to see an ostrich complain like, oh, I just kicked a human in the face, now my toe hurts, because it doesn't. Our toes are not well designed for doing a lot of things that we do, because they're not based on their original purpose. They're crappy hands being used for walking on. Oh. But there you go. Okay, next question. How to draw anything. Go ahead. You, and then you. What's that? Tears. Okay, so we're going to start liquid. So okay, so I'm just going to start off with the most basic cartoony tear. Jim. Okay, so I mean, if you're just trying to indicate tears, that whole classic cartoon raindrop shape is not a bad way to indicate it, or to do sweat and stuff like that. If you're doing somebody's eye, just having that shape, or even the kind of the droopy river shape. Not the worst way to do it, but if you want to get more realistic, we're talking essentially about, if we're talking about a tear on a surface of a face or something like that, it's essentially like it's almost like a hemisphere of glass or similar transparent material, but you're seeing it usually. Now in a situation like this, light source that way, shadows that way. So the way I like to think of it is, you can put a highlight on it if you want to get it really realistic. And then remember, it's like a little magnifying glass here. So I'm going to put a little light bulb here. Light hits here, then it gets expanded out from where it hits the glass initially, and then forms a little highlight here on the opposite side on the bottom surface. And then this will be a little darker. So suddenly you have something that looks kind of like a realistic version of anything that's kind of like a half lens of with a shadow on the back of it. So if you want to do a giant tear or a giant raindrop. I should also mention, this shape doesn't usually happen in reality. Almost immediately after a drop of, like if you're drawing a free flying drop or a raindrop, almost immediately after separating off from what it's the rest of the water, it almost immediately tries to form a sphere. And it might turn a blobby shape, and then if it gets really big and it's falling and it stays together, it tends to form kind of like a floppy flying pancake shape as it kind of flattens out against air resistance. But the basic principle is kind of still, when you have, if you just go like that, that's a pretty good way to simplify realistically what a drop of something transparent like water looks like under a strong light source while it's flying. And I'm going to do one more thing. The other thing is tears in eyes. There's a famous sculptor named Italian late Renaissance sculptor named Bernini, who's famous for being able to do facial expressions that no other sculptor was ever able to do before in history, including eyes that were watery done in white marble, carved out of white marble. And his shape for that was essentially, when your eye's getting watery, the water starts bunching up on your lower eyelid. And suddenly your lower eyelid suddenly has this big, giant, almost like half ring of transparent material kind of bunching up on it. So if you imagine a realistically drawn eye, I kind of draw the iris and pupil, kind of like what I was talking about there. But now you've got essentially a big teardrop getting ready to fall down here. And the bottom edge of the eyelid is going to essentially get a stretched out version of this effect on it. So if you want to, you can just leave out the highlight because a lot of it's really bright anyway, but if you want to put a highlight on, you can put that there. And just essentially I'm going to draw this higher so you can see a little more easily. And you just go like that. That's a reasonably realistic way of indicating an eye filling with tears. And then you can take this drop and you can stretch it out if the teardrop has actually finally broken its surface tension and it's actually dripping down the face. Okay. So get that one off for you. Here. Oh, can you pass that down? Okay, thank you. Okay, and then you had a question. What's that? Oh, sorry. Children? Okay, let me see. Okay, so I'm going to start talking about this while I start putting the shoe on, so I'm no longer walking a little bit club-footed. Okay. But I'm going to draw an extreme childish face and an extreme kind of adulty face. Okay, so when we think of kind of like, not all baby faces look like this, but I'm going to exaggerate a little bit. When babies are born, they're born with relatively large brains and large eyes. And as you get older, these are the two parts of your face that don't grow as fast as the rest of you. So proportionally, your brain looks smaller and your eyes look smaller. So big brain case. Big eyes. And otherwise small features. Kind of send that signal of cute to the head, or as they say in manga, chibi. I mean, actually, if I want to really, let me see. The whole kind of part of the whole basis of a lot of manga styles is exaggerating the chibi qualities even more than a real baby has. Now, as you get older, your eyes proportionally get much small, don't grow as fast as the rest of your head. Your brain doesn't grow as fast as the rest of your head. So you end up with relatively small, close set piggy eyes, heavy brow, your jaw will often get a lot bigger. The cartilage on your head is the part of your head that never actually stops growing, which is mainly your nose and your ears. And if you want to really kind of, there's a principle in biology called neoteny, which means retaining childish features. And then not being neotenous is associated with looking very adult. And literally, like, apes are less neotenous than humans. Humans are more neotenous than apes. We look like, to apes, essentially, we look like baby monkeys that never quite, or like, they never quite mature into fully grown adult apes. And women tend to be more neotenous than men, which means less ape-like. So a lot of the features we associate with looking more youthful, more childish, more baby-like, we associate with being more feminine. And a lot of features that we associate with being more, with older, we associate with being more masculine. And if you take, really, I'm going to show you two extremes of that. I'm going to two characters who, the whole basis of how they look, no matter what version it is that they're hyper-masculine looking, but in different ways. So that longer chin, out-of-control cartilage, heavy brow. One version of that's the Joker. Another version of that, but much broader with a piggy eye, going more with the piggy eye thing in the heavy brow. Is the Hulk. And they're two extreme caricatures of masculinity and kind of masculine associated biological traits. So, ow, ooh, sharp paper, okay. But those are kind of some basic principles on drawing youthful versus adult. Okay, more questions, go ahead.
Flowers at an angle, like turning toward the sun?
Oh, boy, the thing about flowers, they're delicate. So when I draw them with a heavy black line, it's harder to kind of capture that. I'm gonna say like the best thing is if you can use reference, but okay. I'm not going to do a specific flower, but just kind of the thing is, like, have you ever seen a PBS oil painting program where someone's talking about the flowers or stuff like that? And a lot of it is not so much even capturing the right details, but capturing the delicacy. And this is very much about brush stroke. Now, if you can replicate this with a black line, you kind of have to imagine it's wrapping around something delicate and not locking it in with a heavy black line that looks with a dead looking line. But the easiest way to do it is kind of and a lot of things like this, like when you're drawing like splashing water, if you try to draw it as clean geometric shapes, it's going to look very heavy. But if you can capture the texture feel of it, then you really kind of capture it. So if you can kind of imagine what I've brush stroked here. Without having necessarily drawn the brush strokes first. You've kind of captured the spirit of a flower. So I am not an expert in drawing flowers, though. There are a lot of people who draw much better flowers than I do. So is there anything else you want me to kind of talk about with drawing flowers?
Like a rose has like so many petals to it. How do you show like the multiplicity?
Oh,
Yeah, the depth.
yeah. Yeah, like, you know how like cabbages are actually a flower. Yeah, and like, you know how like the leaves, the petals of a cabbage kind of wrap around, and on the first layer it's in one side, the next layer in it goes, rotates, rotates, rotates. It happens with the rose too. So like, I'm gonna heavy, clean geometric lines, but this is just for diagram purposes. Does anyone here know how many primitive roses did not have as many petals, like in Roman times? It was only like after around the Renaissance and later, they actually overbred roses, so they had more than, I can't remember if it's 4 or 5 petals. I think it's 4.
So it's based on breeding.
Yeah, okay. House of Parliament, UK, they have carvings, okay, medieval carving of a rose. There we go, 5, okay. Okay, so and medieval carvings of on churches and stuff, you'll see this 5-petaled flower. That's a medieval rose, because at the time they really did only have 5 petals. Okay, so, and they kind of, and I think there's an inner ring of 5 petals also, but the basic structure is that. And then if you kind of multiply that, because then it got more and more petals on the more layers, that's the kind of how it goes. But if you understand that 5-petal structure, that's it. There you go. Okay, next question. Go ahead. What's that? Sports car. Okay, so some basic principles on drawing sports cars and cars in general. So like I said with flowers, I went to school with people who are much better at drawing cars than I am, because I went to the Center for Creative Studies in Detroit in the late 80s and early 90s when it was the top car design school in the world, but I was not in the car design program. The guys and gals in the car design program did teach me a lot of tricks though. So I'm gonna roughly sketch out some car stuff. Okay, so let's say you take I'm just gonna draw a rectangle on the ground in perspective. And generally the way like when I was doing proportions on a body, when I was drawing you, I was using the head as a nice, useful, basic measure of proportion. They like to measure them in wheels. And if you can draw a bunch of kind of coin-like shapes in perspective, I think there is generally, at the time, I think there's like one wheel ahead of the actual wheel, 3 behind it, then another wheel, then another one behind it. Then if you can turn this one into a paper towel tube, that'll connect to where the other wheel is on the other side of the car. And in the same perspective, you can take this other real wheel, as opposed to the imaginary measurement ones, and go back. That gives you kind of the basic structure for drawing a car. It's essentially a curvy box. Everything kind of gets widest around the axle of the wheel. It could be a little higher, a little lower. Bumper sticks out and then kind of curves inward. So from the outside corners of the windshield and the windows and stuff like that, everything curves inwards from there. I'm not being precise at all, but this is just kind of, again, basic principles on how to draw a car and stuff like that. I think these proportions are really, really way off. So if I had a real picture of a car I was kind of basing it on, I could be a little more. If I was doing this for print, I would be much more anal retentive about all this. And you see how everything on the top, this top box of the car is kind of leaning inwards? Typically on a sedan style, well, a sedan or SUV style car hood, essentially you have this little cutoff pyramid on top of a mirror. So the reflection of it will reverse in a little bit. Then there'll be kind of a break here where it's no longer reflecting the sky anymore and it's reflecting stuff in front of the car. So then there'll be a break in the reflections there. On the side of the car, it's reflecting on the part pointing downward, the ground underneath it, and you get high enough, it'll show any mountain ranges, trees, blah, blah, buildings. Oh, that's the wrong place, that's a bumper. If you want to kind of simplify your life and also be a little realistic about it when drawing this wheel, the bottom of the wheel is holding the weight of 1.5 tons, 2 tons on an electric car, 4 or 5 tons, something crazy like that. So the bottom of the tire will flatten out. And when you're doing that really dramatic perspective where your camera is very low to the ground, my car design friends like noting that the far wheel, when you see it from underneath, visually it looks like the sides are straight. And they would just draw it like that. And they say if you try to put curve into it, it actually looks unrealistically too curved based on how much the tire is being flattened out by all the weight it's holding up. So just some kind of loose little tips and tricks on drawing a car. I will say, I generally don't trace when drawing most things inside of a comic book, except sometimes for complex buildings or cars. I don't feel bad about taking a 3D model and then tracing it when I'm doing a car. Let me see, what else is there? Though, one thing, when you do, if you are going to trace something that you're putting into a comic book or a drawing where everything else is even a little bit cartoony, cartoonify it. Make it match the rest of your drawing. If you have one thing that looks like a computer-assisted drafting drawing and everything else looks like a Cartoon Network cartoon, people are going to think it just, one's going to look crappy, the other's going to look good. I'm not sure which, but one of them's going to look crappy, one's going to look good. You want them to both look good next to each other. Okay, more questions.
We are speaking in front of you and behind you at the same time. We're coming to 5 minutes, so maybe we can do one more.
Okay, go ahead.
So hands holding a thing.
Oh, holding a thing. Okay.
Hands like holding a book.
What's the hardest thing? Oh, okay. So one of the trickiest things for me is drawing hands interacting with things. Like for instance, for so many things, like if I want to draw a hand holding a book, I can, at the worst, do a remote control selfie. But then if I'm alone in my studio and I have to draw somebody shaking hands with somebody else, it's kind of like, no, there is no way to do that. I just need to actually wait for somebody else to come around so I can, or two people to come around so I can take a photograph of them shaking hands. Camera photos are wonderful for this type of thing. But okay, give me an example of like the hardest thing to draw of somebody holding something.
I don't know, like holding a small flower or something that's really small.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
Okay. Okay, so what I want you to do is, let me see. So we're gonna, the whole phone reference thing is really important here. So grab anything, or like could be my marker, could be anything in your purse.
Umbrella? Like,
Oh, okay, yeah.
Like this.
Okay, and we're gonna use my phone, and then I want you to take your other hand if you can, and then take a photo of it from the angle that's really difficult.
Like this?
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean
Oh,
to
no, that's
do
perfect.
that.
Okay, is this?
Yeah.
Okay, wait a minute. Let's see.
More thumb.
There's not much of the hand, actually there's not all the hand showing, but I'm gonna, okay, hold it again. I'm gonna take a photo of you holding it.
Okay.
Okay, and then, okay, that way I can show a little more of the hand. Okay, I'm gonna pull down your, okay, there we go. Now we got more hand. Okay,
There we go, all fingers.
yeah, and then that, okay, yeah, because otherwise, yeah. Okay. Okay, so you can see she's holding an umbrella. You'll be able to see it bigger when I start sketching it out, so hold on. Okay, so I mentioned before, okay, so photo reference is good, being able to draw that wonky, were you here for the earlier hand discussion?
No.
Okay, so I mentioned the basic structure when I'm drawing a hand realistically is a wonky, lopsided house. Where the middle finger is, sticks out the most, the walls slope outwards, and then you have the knuckles spaced about evenly from each other, with the middle finger one sticking out the most, and then the knuckle of the thumb being able to go wherever it wants to, because opposable thumb rotates around. We're going to break this down into, if you can draw this shape, this pentagon shape from different angles, you can draw a hand at any angle. So we're going to take this shape here, and you can see that it's from the thumb side. I'm going to imagine pointer finger, ring finger. It's almost like a roof. You can see that from this side, the thumb, the middle finger sticks out the most, or above, like the ridge of a roof. From the other side, it's where it's kind of the deepest valley. The hand is, you weren't here for this, some of you heard this before. The hand is offset on the wrist, where you see on the pinky side, it sticks out a little more, and on the thumb side, it kind of indents it a little bit. From the side this way, you'll see on the palm side, it indents, the hand sticks out a little bit. On the back side, the wrist sticks out a little bit. So that's why I'm doing this little zigzag here. Once you have the knuckles figured out, then you can figure out the fingers. So I'm going to draw your thumb there, thumb knuckle there at least. Ghost of the umbrella. And then you see your pointer finger sticking out there. But once you have that photo reference and you understand how to draw that wonky little house here, that lets you do everything else. And I'm drawing a lot of anatomy that you can't actually see because it's behind the umbrella, but it helps knowing where everything is coming out of. So you can make it make sense when you imagine how the hand's positioned. Yeah, and again, and then okay, I think you said, well, that was the last question. It is, yeah, we're supposed to end at 12:45, it's 12:47. So if you have any more questions, I am at the far end of the convention center. You can ask me questions there and I'll do my best to answer your questions over there. And this one's for you.